If it causes problems for whatever reason, then we'll stop it. Um, but yeah, so who wants to go first? I know you just asked that. Did we lose Sleazy?
No, I'm
No, I
here.
see. Okay, just all fuzzled
Okay.
out for me.
Yeah, it's a little bit
Uh,
video quality is a little bit
you know,
lower.
I'm gonna move to the other room where the router is. Give me a second. I'm gonna enable this shit. Okay, we're moving. Bring my drink.
Yeah, I can throw something in critique submissions just so it's in front of everyone.
Great.
Sounds good.
I wrote this a couple of days ago, just kind of the first run through, and those, so it definitely needs to be workshopped. But let's see, no name, or how about?
I just lagged out like crazy. I don't know if you guys are there.
We're here. I didn't notice.
Yeah, great.
There we go.
Let's do it.
Cool, and I'll read it, and then we can kind of just go through some stuff, and feel free to take a minute after I read it to actually read it. But okay, there's a window open, which sometimes draws the eye to a horizon between a courtyard of silent blue and an orange of desperate reaching trees and promises, like the houses we pass, that there is peace in the soft light of strangers' empty rooms, in the arms, their chair, or the mantle above absent fire. But in passing, my eye returns, satisfied that the vision was disturbed the moment that soft light shared its space with a body, breathing, sharing, moving through its grace. Some typos there, but yeah. So if we want to see what I found in my class, it's actually really hard to talk about poetry without some sort of structure, and sometimes going over some kind of structure helps kind of jog ideas or at least something to say. Um, because at least in my experience, sometimes someone would bring a poem and it's like I have no fucking clue what to say about this. So
I have
it's
some things that I'm sorry. Please continue. I'm interrupting you.
yeah, it's just an option. Like you could just be like, is there any rhyme scheme? Is this like whatever? We don't have to do that. We could skip to just what do we like, what do we don't like, or maybe the best place to jump to just in general is what do we think it's about, and then into what do we like and dislike.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. And what it's about, and what I mean, sort of very broadly, what is the intention? What's the intent of the poem? What's the
Yeah.
I want to see what you guys think before I tell you.
Yeah, Warren, do you mind posting the poem in the workshop channel?
Oh, that would
Uh,
make sense. Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Um,
I see
uh,
writing prompts. Oh, workshop. There it is.
I
Yeah.
had to. I'm on my work computer right now, so I had to go into a different account, and
Oh, you don't have like you got a Smurf account on the Litfic Discord?
yeah,
Oh, no.
You call
exactly.
it a Smurf account?
That's like in MMORPGs. Like people have like, or like I feel like all sorts of video games. People have like a shitty account
Oh,
to fuck
okay.
around with.
Like a banking account.
Yeah.
There it is.
Also, just give. What is your Smurf account, bro? Just give you access, John.
What?
What's your second account?
It's John Goo is cool.
What's the
It's
other?
it's the one that's right. It's in lobby, like
Yeah, I see it.
the
I'm just gonna give you member on that one as well. Cool. Did you want to start? I have some things to say.
You can go first.
Okay. I think the first stanza I really like. It reminds me. I feel like I talk a lot about Pale Fire.
Yeah. Mm.
It reminds me a lot of. I was rereading the first part of it, um, and I don't really have a great. I mean, part of like there's two images that come to mind from that poem. One is the room sitting on top of the room with snow having built up the wall outside of it to the windowsill, sitting on top of the snow through the window. This image of just like peace and tranquility and domesticity and whatever. But also, there's another goofy bit pretty early in the poem, which I'm only remembering because I just reread the beginning of it, which is he remembers John Shade, the narrator, remembers when he was a kid being able to see a certain house while he's walking to school, and then when he's an adult still living in the neighborhood, I think in his childhood home, he can't see it from that vantage point, and there's this shift in perspective, um, and in his like there's a very real like misremembering, but for him it's like the landscape has changed much more than even though it hasn't, much more than him having misremembered things. That's just to say, like, I don't know. I don't think those are too connected thematically beyond like this very. I mean, I really like the first stanza a lot. This like interpretive, like I'm staring at the sky. It's a very pretty description of the sun setting over trees, um, and what it means to the viewer. Um, there are some moments in it that were very nice. It didn't surprise me that you added the S to empty rooms. I don't know why. In the soft light of strangers, empty rooms. In the arms, their chair, the mantle above absent fire. I think there's ways in which this poem is quite straightforward, which I like. I like poems that are not hiding what they're trying to communicate. And then there are times when it gets a little more ambiguous. At the end of the first stanza, in the arms, is like a weird. It doesn't, to me, fit in the straightforwardness of the rest of that kind of list. Like I mean, we can interpret it, right? Like, no doubt we can guess that it is the arms of the chair or it's the arms of lovers or something like that, whatever. I mean, sure, but my point is that there's more ambiguity there than there is in like in the soft light of strangers, empty rooms. I'm assuming that it's intentional that we read through that line into empty rooms in the soft light of strangers. Maybe should there be an apostrophe on strangers?
There was at first, I believe. I just quickly ran over this right now as we were doing it, and just for the chair comment, I was missing an of. So,
Mm-hmm.
And the
yeah,
arms of the chair.
yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Um, and the second stanza, I mean, I've only done one poetry workshop, and the poet who led it was constantly like, "Do you need this stanza?"
Mm.
Right? And I want to ask. I don't really feel strongly one way or the other, but I do want to ask if the second stanza is necessary because the first stanza is pretty tight and pretty effective at doing what it's doing. Um, and there's this transition, right, from the feeling of the first stanza, from the observation of the first stanza to the more inward reflection of the second stanza, and in some ways the more ambiguous second stanza. So I'm going to leave it there, kind of with that open question.
Cool.
I'll pick it up from there. And yeah, I actually didn't get the first stanza. I mean, the second stanza um, is less ambiguous to me.
Hmm.
Um, so the first stanza, the speaker is sort of looking out the window and presumably just looking at the horizon outside. And in the second stanza, he's thinking about what I interpret as his girlfriend or his ex girlfriend, um, 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 reminiscing about her, her well, literally her body um, being in the same room. Um, um, and she's absent right now. And I think that is. I mean, it took me a while to sort of figure out what the first stanza was saying, but I think it works well with the second stanza. You sort of like the first part is just sort of this lonely, contemplative, and mostly sort of focused on this image, and then you reinterpret it, that image, in light of the revelation that, as the speaker is looking out the window, he's thinking about his girlfriend, and that's my interpretation of the poem.
All right. So for my interpretation, I guess is
Is
that
there
sort
another
of
interpretation?
I see a distinct shift between the two stanzas that sort of, to me, sort of replicates a journey, right? You start at the window and then the reader is immediately tossed to the horizon, right? With the description of the blue and orange, the desperate reaching trees. The way I interpret that to be is sort of like a yearning. So the speaker starts off in a place of loneliness, and then he basically looks out the window and reaches for the external affection from other people, from finding peace and comfort in strangers. But then when he returns back, right, in the second stanza, he returns satisfied. He realizes that he does not necessarily, well, they realize that they does not necessarily need other people in order to be happy. And sometimes there's just that idea of happiness in wanting, in searching for something. And through that, the speaker reaches a state of peace. So start off from a state of wanting to a state of peace. Sort of is the way I interpreted it, but it's a little bit out there.
No, I mean, I think it's not necessarily out there. I do wonder if literally the language gets there, like satisfied that the vision was disturbed, right? Like looking at less looking at the line breaks and more at where the commas are, which is really because the lines do run into one another. So like, is the viewer satisfied in some broader sense, or are they convinced of something, right? Satisfied that the vision was disturbed at the moment. Sorry, the vision was disturbed the moment that soft light shared its space with the body. I mean, it's quite. I think there is ambiguity there. I'm not sure. Actually, now that I read it again, it's. I mean, I'm interested in like why the word satisfied is there at all, actually, right? Because clearly the vision is going to be disturbed when a body enters into that space. To your point, John, I think that the person is there, because it really is like the viewer is distracted, like in a literal, like non-metaphorical way, right? They're like looking through the window or something, and the vision is disturbed the moment that soft light, the light coming through the window, shares its space with the body. But I don't know. I mean, I think that that's like kind of one of the strengths of this poem is that there is like pretty well deployed ambiguity in like in the sense that I want to ask that question, right? Which I think is like what is the best kind of ambiguity is not like I don't know what the fuck is going on here. It's like, oh, I'm interested. How do I figure this out? There are places where I don't think that's the case necessarily as much. I really think like in the arms, I don't know. Still, I'm just like hung up on that. I don't know why. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoy just like the. It's a very like sensual, and very like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like very of a moment in time, and I think that
Yeah.
Roderick, your interpretation of like there is movement in this poem, right, from one place to the next, as the thinking or as the thoughts of the viewer or the speaker move from one place to the next. And it does a very effective job of transporting or moving the reader with it.
Awesome. In a weird way, all of you pretty much touched on major parts of it, which was really interesting. And if I combined everyone's impression, you'd essentially get the exact meaning. But everyone pretty much touched on it, which I'm actually happy to ruin in a second, because I wrote this very recently, and it wasn't like there are some poems I'll just like struggle over for hours, kind of thing. And like I really care about not telling you what it is, and you have to get it. Usually this is more abstract, but this is a little more, as you guys kind of caught on, pretty, in some ways, pretty straightforward. I do have a question about one point that reading it now reads awkwardly, and I'm curious what you guys think. And that's to a horizon between a courtyard of silent blue and an orange of desperate reaching trees and promises like the houses we pass that there is peace in the soft light of strangers, empty rooms, in the arms of their chair or the mantle above the absent fire. So a big focus for me, at least what I wanted to be a focus, was the promise that there is peace. But then there's this awkward, it reads kind of awkwardly now, like the houses we pass, right? And so that feels to me awkward now. I wonder what you guys think.
Yeah, I thought that was fine.
Okay.
Please go ahead, John. I've been talking a lot.
Oh, sorry. I finally understand what the first stanza is saying. After you read that just now, Warren. I mean, that's just a very complex sentence to parse in the first sentence, in the first stanza. So, I just want to point out it's a little bit tricky to read in one pass.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, which might be, I think in part, at least what, I'm describing an image of looking through a window.
Yeah.
And as I'm getting to the crux of what's happening in my impression of that window, I switch. Suddenly we're walking past houses, right?
That's actually a good point. I didn't really see that. They might be like, I mean, I feel like you could adjust it a little bit to make it a little more like houses one passes on the street or something like that.
Well, yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, Sleazy. There's two things. One is the houses that we pass promise that there is peace. I mean, it's just a very abstract idea, or a very abstract feeling. I don't know what it means for a house that we pass to promise peace, or what that necessarily has to do with this, with the sort of feelings in this poem. And then the other thing I wanted to say was the "we" in this sentence. I wasn't sure. I was interpreting this "we" after reading the second stanza as the speaker's partner, like the houses that my girlfriend and I pass, as opposed to the houses that one passes.
Yeah, I think that's probably correct.
Yeah.
What is it sort of like an invitation from the speaker to the reader? So all by we, it's meant that all of us as human beings in our lives, in the lives we lead.
I mean,
giving me more credit than I deserve, Roderick, but I like it.
I mean, it's honestly a better word choice because it offers that interpretation using we rather than like one or something, right? Like, I think that's a great place to be like, to have the personal interpretation, which is the speaker and their partner or whomever is in the second stanza, but also we in the general sense. I honestly, I think it's a good point, which is this perspective change is like a little awkward, but I think it's pretty easily fixed.
Okay. I also wanted to say, Sleazy, I do, when wrote this, I wrote the first stanza and was fairly, I'm like, okay, this is here. And then, but I wanted, and this will become clear after I just say what it's sort of about, but yeah, the second stanza I don't feel great about. So I'm glad you kind of touched on that. And it was interesting that, John, you found it a little more clear, because I was worried that would be the kind of strange, more ambiguous part of the poem. But in many ways, John, you nailed it with the kind of this, someone enters the room, the girlfriend passes, something like that, and kind of, disturbs the vision, so to speak. So it was nice to hear the two, someone liked it. Sleazy, you thought it was a little out of place, or it wasn't necessary, right?
Yeah, I don't want to convey that I didn't enjoy it or something. I just think that, like, if we're aiming for like a very concise and tight poem, like, not even, I don't know if the second stanza is less tight than the first stanza, but like the first stanza is quite tight, and like, do we need the second stanza?
And I'll say one thing in response to that. I mean, for me, I don't know what the feeling in the first stanza is, but and maybe it's not a feeling that's it's even articulable necessarily. But it's this, it's very abstract, right? There's this horizon in the courtyard that promises that there is peace in the soft light of strangers' empty rooms. That sentence, what does that mean? But the reason why I like the combination of the first stanza and the second stanza is there's a lot of sense of like of loneliness in the first stanza, or like maybe sort of a yearning not to be lonely, because there are lots of these sort of these feelings in that first stanza, these desperate reaching trees, sort of a metaphor for loneliness there. Strangers as empty rooms, empty arms of a chair, presumably, an absent fire. There's just all this emptiness and absence in the first stanza, and that's what's sort of like gets relieved by what happens in the second stanza, the girlfriend entering the room. I think that's that for me, that's the point of the poem. You start off in this sort of empty, sort of lonely, contemplative mood, and then you shift to a more a situation where you're relieved to that loneliness. Is my interpretation.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I think if I can ruin it, because this is a recent poem and sort of two impressions that I've given, and it will explain, because it is an interesting phenomenon. I think you're right, John, that it's like, well, what exactly do you mean that these empty rooms promise peace or something like that?
Yeah.
So I live in a nice neighborhood. Now I live in an apartment within a nice neighborhood. So there's these huge houses around near the lake, but I'm not in one of these buildings. Not that my apartment's terrible or anything. But my girlfriend and I go on these long walks, and we just kind of judge these people's houses because, they're like practically millionaires. They have huge yards that are taken care of that they probably never touched and whatever. But an impression that I tend to get, and that she's at least sympathetic to, is when I walk by these very nice houses, and maybe I could mention that they're very nice, and I look into these empty rooms, there's the strangest sense that there's like a promise of peace. Like, oh, whoever lives in this house, their life's perfect. It's very much the emotion.
That's like
that I
not
get.
at all how I like felt that.
Yeah,
Really,
no, and
like,
I really, yeah.
No,
And the same.
yeah, please.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
And I have a similar. There's a window in my living room, and occasionally I've turned to it and I've seen this horizon with the trees. It's a pretty scene, right? And it gave me the same emotion. So I'm like, okay, well, let's try to combine these things in some kind of fluid way. And then to your point, even this is even probably the strangest impression of the whole thing is when we were walking a couple of days ago. I had this. It's a pretty constant impression for some reason, seeing nice houses that are empty and for some reason promise some kind of idyllic life. The moment one of these families actually manifested, that someone walked into the room, this kind of vision of promise and perfection disappeared. The moment it actually was embodied and there was someone there, and it was kind of this like, oh yeah, no, that's a human. Like we're all humans. There's no promise of peace, essentially. It's not really what living is really like. And so in that way, I really wanted to get, how should I put it? That was a relief. I'm sure you can imagine, right? If there's promise of peace that's unattainable to me, and then it's ruined, there's almost a cynical like, oh well, good, And so, John, you nailed it in a lot of ways where it is, and again, like Roderick, the way you described it gave me a lot more, made me feel better about it than I already happened because I didn't realize how many, the desperate, the absent fire, the weird ambiguity with the strangers' rooms and their arms of their chair, and then that vacancy being filled with an actual body. I didn't realize really that I was doing that. But yeah, that's kind of the emotions, the situations that kind of inspired the poem. I don't know if that was any more intelligible than the first read, but yeah. Sleazy, so it was very far from your impression, I take it.
What do you
At least
mean?
that's what you were saying. At least you said with the first stanza that the empty houses part.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I was really thinking of that scene from Pale Fire, where it's like you're looking in to a warm house, a warm empty house from outside, where the snow is so high that it's reaching up to the window, and the house frame, the interior of the house framed through the window frame is like a painting sitting on snow.
Right.
It's like this. I mean, I'm really projecting a lot onto it. I know that, but that's kind of the feeling that I got from it, and the image that when you said peace, that's the piece that I had from it. Is the piece
Okay, I don't think that's too far.
Yeah.
So kind of idyllic, right? You're like, wow, that's a perfect Christmas, right? Is kind of
something like that,
what you're
like a warm picture, like a painting, right? Like
yeah,
a reality that is as beautiful as a painting.
yeah. And that's exactly my impression when I walk around these places. But the curious thing is, the moment I see someone in it, the
Yeah.
illusion is ruined.
Yeah.
So,
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate that. Roderick, I feel like I didn't do justice to your reading. You gave me a lot of credit. But I guess that's good. I've had poems that it's actually really good. I've had poems that I've read and they were interpreted so erotically that it was frankly very disappointing, as you can imagine, because I'm like, oh man, God, my whole poem was a Freudian slip. You know what I mean? So I love it when readings are different and actually, not to say that the erotic reading is bad per se. It was just so unexpected that it was kind of embarrassing. But I won't share that poem. Did anyone else final words, or anyone want to submit a poem?
I guess I can submit one of mine if you, Warren, if you don't mind, sort of, even though you have already seen it before.
Yeah, I don't mind.
All right, I'll put it in workshop. Let's see. Just find it. Oof.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to grab a chair.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put on deodorant because I always get sweaty when I talk for some reason.
Yep. All right, it should be in workshop.
Oh, it's a long one. Let's go.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Don't worry about it, man. You want to read it?
Sure. Hopefully, I won't butcher my own poem too much in terms of pronunciation. Um, best wear. The yellow blossoms of morrow bloom high in the depression, nestled deep within the mountains where Papos aerial forums sway. But the cool breath of Coriolis, white as a glacier, is retreating nearby. Step as my feet sinks into mud below. Melted ice and deceased life soak into my good hiking shoes. Think I pull one foot out, and the other with suit clinging on, then shoot and slip further into limpid cold, disturbing the brown-bottomed traders and carry slavai wearing their ornate castles. Colorless deep dream look at the muted thunder, a precipitation for the water. Along the wall, my kicks are drenched. The morrow's day I phrase with ease. Muscles grow on unten stones, gnawing on me and on thee. Through no fault of our own, lightning strikes great oaks. The yellow blossoms of morrow bloom alongside others native or introduced. In the back of beyond, finished orreries, listening to the echoes carried from wooded wives unknown. Kim still, for I lack the vitality, so much so the entire kingdom has gone to ruin. My Subiac stress in fetid eyes and yellow stains, strewn all about the wicked Chesterfield. Water flooding villages, pooled by the skirting, mold and bryophytes reclaiming the land and drywall. The castle weathering to regolith, the fallen decaying to humus. Home is where you hang your hat, and place on dusty wooden shelves the scanty used obsolescent technology, which gathers even more dust. Persisting too long as legacy software, vanishing too soon as expired youths. Nothing is ever wholly forgotten. If it had been, we would not know. Mayhaps remembrance is asymptotic, exactly enough to smart from some obscure place within, though all and sundry will have been forgotten, of course, by the darkling waking. Till a week from next Tuesday, I sit within the recesses of my oaken kingdom. Good morrow and fare thee well.
It's really hard, I feel like, to hold it all in your head at the same time. Not a critique or anything. I'm just commenting on my own difficulty and like saying some shit.
No, I've responded to this poem. I remember, as you noted, Roderick.
Yep.
I will say, I think your reading of it, I think frankly, your accent brings a new life to it. It's interesting to read it in my own voice and then hearing the author's voice, and even the small nuances, the pauses that you make, really, it brings something really new to it. So I really enjoyed that. But
Yeah, it really did. I
I,
agree completely.
if it would help anyone, because I do generally agree. I think with the idea that it's hard to contain, in part because it reads to me like a. I can't remember what your response was. I think you clarified what exactly it was about when we talked about it, but I'm just remembering my impression that
Wait,
it's kind
don't say what it is because I'm going to this without any preconceptions. So
I don't
I'm not.
remember what he said. I remember what I thought it was, but John, you should go first just in
Oh,
case.
okay, sorry, Sleaze, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I've got nothing.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm not thinking about it.
Well, I mean, so I needed a moment um, just to digest it a little bit. I mean, so the initial impression is that it's about I guess presumably a young man going out into the woods, and sort of this um, this naturalistic scene of the speaker going on a hike, and there's a little bit of I guess scientific terminology um, brought into the story for whatever effect um, is you're going for there, and that's the first half of the poem, and then there's this turn where it becomes much more abstract,
Mhm.
and
Where would I ask you
I'm
where you
trying to understand
can I ask you where you
what
place
that
that
abstraction
turn?
is. Okay.
Can I ask you where you place that turn if you had to?
Let me. It's in the second um, image, and I would say this maybe the second halfway through the second stanza, something like that. But I might have to look at it a little bit closer. But it's somewhere in the second
I'm
stanza.
sorry, I totally derailed you. I was just interested to.
No. I mean, like that's a relevant question for Roderick as well. Um, and there's something in it about this. Um, the abstract point that's being made is something about technology, something about the modern day versus nature, or technology versus nature, and the modern day versus the past, and about um, time and um, time in the sense of you lose something as you progress from the past to the present. Um, and then the end line is sort of this revelation that this is something that a speaker goes through um, every every week or something like this regularly. That the speaker goes on this hike regularly, and um, this connection happens. This connection with the past or with nature happens, and is not permanently lost, or is regained every time the speaker comes back.
Yeah, I mean, I also noticed a pretty distinct shift in language and maybe even in theme. Um, I mean, for me, it was even earlier. I think maybe just because I mean, I don't know, right? Like there's some things that are very. I mean, to your point, there's this mathematical or scientific language,
Yeah.
um, or just like not even. It's like anachronistic, but like not anachronistic, right? It's like I mean, kind of, right? It's like you mentioned old software where you use, bryophytes, finis ruris. I don't know what that means. Uh, Stuff like that, where it's shifting between very idyllic. I mean, all of the language is kind of there's anachronistic language here. Words that I don't know. The old blossoms of Morrow, no one would say, right? Like no one would say that in conversation. Um,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of like playing with language here. A lot of it's like pretty fun, actually. I really enjoy just like I really enjoyed hearing you read it. Uh, to Warren's point, I think also like it's a little like confusing in like maybe a good way at times and not so good way at other times. For some reason, the mention of software really took me out of this like idyllic, pretty, naturalistic landscape for a moment. Uh, Obsolescent technology. Was there software? Or is it just obsolescent technology that I'm remembering?
No, there's on the third stanza on the second page. There's a line: "Persisting too long is legacy software."
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like so. I mean, there's nothing like that weird. There's nothing weird about that sentence, right? It's like a very normal thing, but so much of it is very like it's very pretty, right? And I mean that in like not a derogatory way. I mean, like in the way that pretty can be used sometimes. I mean, like it's very like idyllic and so on, and like, oh, it's nice to think of a field of flowers and so on. Um, and so I'm interested in how those moments of change in language, because it's not something that I do in my writing ever. And I mean, I play with structure a lot, but I don't play with like the um, formality of language is basically what's going on here almost. Uh, it brings you out of, or brought me out of, I should say, uh, the tone and kind of emotional environment of the poem in kind of like a jarring but almost like pretty interesting way as well.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think, John, I think my original reading of it was essentially very similar, except it was uh, I don't know the age, but some kind of protagonist, narrator going into the forest in a post-apocalyptic scenario,
Oh,
right? And
interesting.
so that's what I took the technology decaying and that sort of stuff. Though I think those, technology is, what a catapult is technology
Yeah, I mean, I
technically.
was,
So it's ambiguous whether it's modern day technology or past. Um, but I think so. That's just my general sense of it. And there is this kind of meditation on time and death, and almost kind of a yay saying spirit to it near the end. Um, right, it's kind of musing, and then in kind of a sad way, but never a way in which it's kind of overran by it. It's kind of one with the nature of decay. Uh, but as we read it this time, I think some new impressions that I have now is that there's a lot of texture, and I think this works on like two layers, just in the sheer description. The yellow blossoms of Marl bloom high, the depression, like it's a good scene, but then there's an added like or it's you can imagine it very easily. But then there's another layer of texture, and it's specifically within the language you use, Roderick. And I really like this aspect. So there's a lot of consonants and alliteration being played on, and that gives it a nice, not necessarily tempo, but a nice beat. And one place where I think this is really clear is in the second stanza of the whole poem is and you can really hear it. Step as my feet sink into mud below, melted ice and deceased life, soak into my good hiking shoes. Dank, I pull one foot out and the other, and then this maybe is where it really comes close or becomes clear. Wet silt clinging on, then tilt and slip further into limpid cold, disturbing the brown bottom uh, detritus, and caddis larvae wearing their ornate cases. So there's a ton of play on the tilt, slip, the L sound,
Yeah.
limpid, cold, the D sound, disturbing the brown bottom, good alliteration there, detritus, and caddis larvae wearing their ornate cases. So that just gives like your mouth texture, like you feel it in your mouth when you say it, and that's what I like about alliteration and consonants. And then on top of that, and this is something I remember critiquing um, my first time around, was the use of what I would call academic language, right? And some of it does take me out of it insofar as like, I don't know what a caddis larvae is, and I don't know what a Euroforum sway is or any of that. And I think um, the trouble with that is it does make the poem feel a bit niche in who the audience probably should be or who the narrator expects their audience to be. Because I really don't know what those things are. And so suddenly it's a very clear image. Blossoms bloom high in the depression, and then this foreign word comes in, and the image, I don't know how to add that word to the image. And so on one hand, that might, that could be your intent. So I think that works in a way, and it also could take some readers out of it. But with what I was saying about texture, and kind of what you were saying, Sleazy, where there's something playful with the language.
Mm.
That kind of academic language also adds another sort of texture, right? It's hard to pronounce. My word struggles to go over it, to pronounce it, and whereas I can't necessarily follow it conceptually. I think that's interesting. at least this is my take right now, that it does add another sort of layer of like physicalness to the poem. So yeah, that's my general thoughts right now.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Your feedback was actually very, very informative. Um, I was just thinking because um, with a lot of academic languages, just because my background is in biology, so it just naturally makes its way into my daily vocabulary. Wasn't intentional on that part, but I'll definitely consider whether or not to make it sort of less obtuse in a way, so that the flow of the image can be coherent. Specifically, I wanted to ask I wanted to ask your thoughts on the sort of very last, on the second to last stanza and one line specifically. So, first of all, for the penultimate stanza, um, do you feel like at any point does it feel like the um, speaker might be explaining the message a little bit too much? Do you feel like it's sort of like a baseball bat in your face, as my English professor would used to call it, in that it dumps a little bit too much or pulls the curtain back a little bit too much so that your suspension of disbelief is temporarily broken? Or is it sort of okay for, because there's a sort of a thesis statement in there.
I mean, if you're,
Right.
you're referring to nothing is ever wholly forgotten. If it had been, we would not know.
Just the two lines after that.
Mayhaps, okay. I mean, the language is weird enough that like I didn't get it. Right? Asymptotic. Mayhaps remembrance is asymptotic. Like it's approaching a limit. I guess it's been a while since I did math that had that shit. Exactly enough to smart from some obscure place. Smart is a weird verb there, and I didn't know what it meant in that context.
My impression is, I mean, there's two ways you could go with it, or at least that comes to mind. I think the poem is pretty complex, and with that in mind, getting a little bit explicit at the end might do you some favors, in the sense that if someone's, at least, when I don't understand a poem and it's fairly long, and then near the end the message is at least sort of hinted at, it helps me conceptualize what the last couple stanzas were saying, right? And so sometimes I think that helps me personally be like, oh, that's what he was talking about earlier. And so that it might be beneficial in that way, because I think a reader might be reading this and be like, okay, this is a lot of interesting scenery, but I don't know exactly what they're saying about it. And so that last stanza is kind of like, well, hey, this is sort of what I'm saying about it.
What did you think exactly enough to smart from some obscure place within means? Like, what does smart mean in that context?
Smart means to me, and I wanted to mention on some of the slang. I take it as like a slang. It's kind of figure out. I smarted it. I thought about it. I don't know if that's right, but as I read this, especially with your accent, Roderick, it made me realize, and maybe I'm wrong, that there's a decent amount of slang in here, and I think again that creates a nice contrast with the academic language, right? Because they're right next to each other, and so that makes an interesting kind of feeling. Yeah, as for the thesis at the end, I didn't mind it. I didn't think like, oh, well, you probably shouldn't have told me that. You know what I mean?
All right. The second is just general use of language stuff. Is there any words which you would like me to clarify or sort of just explain?
Yeah, what does smart mean?
Smart. It's actually, this is interesting. So the speaker of this poem. So technically, I'm writing a novel that's composed of little pieces, essentially. So dialogue transcripts, message histories, emails back and forth, letters and poetry and short stories that are all written by the characters. And sort of you read it, and then you read those pieces produced by the characters, and then you sort of get what the characters are going through. So for this particular character is fairly old, so a lot of the vocabulary he uses are obsolete. So smart before it has been sort of reappropriated in recent generations to mean sort of intelligent or clever. It used to be a verb that means it hurts.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that that's
So,
like that's smart
yeah.
or whatever. Still, so what does it mean? Oh, it hurts from some obscure place within. Sure. Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Hurts.
I mean, I definitely got the sense that you were using some language in that way. I mean, some of it's quite obvious, right? Morrow, from the beginning of that image.
I'm also curious about the speaker's nationality, because there's something about it that's it's not. It doesn't strike me as either American or English. Maybe I don't know. Is there something Scottish or something? That's what is the yeah.
So it's the speaker. It's supposed to be from a particularly rural English-speaking area, where a lot of these features a lot of these older features of the language tend to be preserved. Whereas in big cities, slang gets turned over very quickly. So meaning of a word changes relatively fast. While in rural areas, they have been preserved. And I especially, this is really subtle, and I don't mind if nobody in the world ever notices this, but I have deliberately tried to avoid using words that are of Greek or Latin origin. I picked words that specifically that came from Old Saxon or Old Germanic, so the actual English words. If you are on Reddit, you might heard of the subreddit English. It's where it's basically a subreddit that where they use English, but no foreign derived loanwords are allowed, and so the language that is in essence like quote unquote purebred English is sort of very different, and that sort of is very fascinating to me. And also because in my novel thing, all the dialogue are not tagged, so sometimes there are multiple people speaking, and it's good to have characters to have a pretty distinct voice that you can identify. So, oh, this conversation is between these two characters and stuff like that.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your native language, Roger?
My native language is Chinese.
Okay.
Mandarin.
Mandarin.
Yeah.
Oh, you're Chinese?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, and then the yellow flower model is a reference to a Chinese idiom, which is a Middle Chinese poem, which references that sense of decay that Warren and John was sort of getting at. It's let me see if I remember. It comes from the idiom 昨日黄花, so it should be 相逢不必别离久，不见黄花明日黄花蝶也愁。So it's just basically this poet who was expressing the sentiment with this line that you enjoy it while it lasts, because tomorrow it might not be there for you to enjoy anymore. So that's sort of the reference. Finally, for the last bit, sorry for dragging this on a little bit. Till a week from next Tuesday. This I've never used this this was a colloquialism, and it's used to mean something else. It's something that I found on Wiktionary, and I haven't heard a lot of people, at least in my generation, use it a lot. So I don't know if you guys sort of does it? Do you read it literally, or do you read it?
Literally.
Or was you able to read it and
It's
take
sort of
away a meaning
idiomatically.
that's
I see.
different? Hmm?
I wonder if that's a British idiom. I mean, I read it, I read it very literally, but I wonder if it's from British English, because that's not something I was aware of.
Yeah, I've never heard of that as an idiom. I guess like
I just looked it up.
yeah.
It means, and it's kind of the vibe, but I did take it literally. It's an unspecified date or time far in the future. Um, and there's kind of a mood there that I picked up, but I did take it literally for the most part.
I guess like
Okay.
so it's hard to read. I guess like if there's anything to part with, it's hard to read this kind of poem because it basically requires footnotes, right? Like as a native English speaker, there's a lot of language and even English idioms, obviously, that I don't know, which is fine. It just kind of requires footnotes.
I think that especially works, at least from my impression, in the context of a novel where we see more of this character. So I think with that in mind, I think you could pull that off.
Yeah.
And I would say that to Sleazy's point, the difficult to read and difficult to parseness of the poem is a feature rather than a bug, and it's something that like I don't think that I mean if the point of the poem is to be difficult, I don't have an issue with that if that's the intention, and I don't I don't think Sleazy's suggestion is necessarily to make the poem easier to understand. Just that that's just something that we notice is a feature of the poem.
So when you guys read, do you just generally for when you're reading lit fic specifically, do you ever, when you encounter something that you don't quite understand, a line that you're quite not sure, do you sort of hop onto a dictionary or hop onto the internet to sort of figure it out? Or do you just sort of try to interpret what it is and move on?
Unless I'm in class and I can make a comment about it in class, I usually don't, to be quite frank.
It depends. Yeah. I feel like if you're reading some shit that you like are really into,
yeah,
right, or like it's very important for you to read or whatever, you need motivation, right? It just takes work. And I read a lot of shit. And if I found this in a literary journal, I probably wouldn't put the effort in just because it's like, unless I was really into it, I probably wouldn't put the effort in. So you narrow. I mean, I think it goes without saying. And to John's point, I'm not trying to say like, oh, we shouldn't, make it simple or whatever. But it's worth acknowledging that you drastically narrow the scope of who's going to understand the poem and who's going to stick with it by making it as difficult as it is. And that's fine. That's just a decision that one has to make as a writer.
Yeah, and I'll say for my own part, Roderick, I mean, given the difficulty of this poem, it's probably not one that I mean, one, I don't really read poetry, but two, like if I started seeing this after the first stanza, I'd be like, well, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to. I'm probably honestly not going to stick around for the rest of it, just because that's it's more work than I want to put in on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. I mean, really though, I think that's like it's not a criticism per se, and I don't mean for you to take it as such, but like it's really important to understand that like it's very hard. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do. Also, I feel like I'm making an assumption that you'd want it to be read by more people, which maybe you don't.
Oh no, I'm not looking to get published. I'm writing this mostly like 99% for myself.
Oh yeah, I think it's a very yeah, of course.
Yeah, but just generally because I will be posting I will probably be posting more pieces from my whip
Cool.
onto the Discord. So I'm wondering if when I'm getting if I do get feedback, if you guys are generally sort of will want to scrutinize it, or more sort of interpret it from your with all the knowledge that you already have.
I think the latter more than the former.
Yeah. I mean, I like writers who do not, or I should say, I like it when writers, when it comes across that writers respect my intelligence and are uh, alluding to ideas or I don't know, just facts that I should know without explaining them to me, because I don't want my hand held when I'm reading a book. I don't expect a book to. I would feel my intelligence was insulted if a writer made a reference to some historical fact or some other literary piece and then told me, oh, this is what that was. I'd be like, I know that. That's I'm not a stupid person. But I guess there's two things. One, there's being respectful of your audience's intelligence and expecting them to be worldly, the person reading the book to be worldly enough to know things that an educated person should know. And it's another thing to be very purposefully obscure. And I mean, like with something like, for example, Ulysses. I don't. There's so many. It's very dense with references and very dense in its language, and it's very written in a way that doesn't give you any help. And I think with that book, I actually I'm not a fan of that book, because I think it is purposefully obscure in a way that's that I derive no pleasure from unpacking. And I think that that's something that I would dislike. And it's up to you whether you feel like you're being purposefully. It's your sort of idea of whether you're being purposefully obscure, or if you're being respectful of the reader's intelligence.
Yeah, I think just as my final note, and maybe two things, is just well, first of all, when you did well with the accent, at least within the poem itself, because when you read it, I just was like, oh, Roderick's Irish. So so it's like, oh, okay, cool. And when I first read it, it sounded sort of English, but when you read it, it did sound like maybe like Irish, or, as you said, rural, someone in rural England. In terms of running into this poem, I think I would finish it. I would read it through. And I think I did ask, or maybe this is what you kind of have to be, if you are going to have an audience, this is what you might have to deal with if they don't read it in the context of your broader novel. I think I got the mood of the poem, but I think there's a lot that does, with the language, sometimes go over my head. And if you're content with that, then I think it's awesome. So.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, thank you guys. Do we have another poem coming up next?
I've got to drop right now for dinner. But thank you all. I hope to do this again.
Yeah. Adios.
Thank you, Steezy.
Yeah, that works. Now, if John doesn't have one, we're potentially done. I think.
Yeah, no, I don't have one that is done
up to your. Done. Okay.
Well, I mean,
well, poetry, short stories,
I didn't realize this was this week, and also I was, but I don't know. Maybe next time I will have something.
Okay. How are you guys feeling in terms of time and energy? I feel a little bad because Uguay did want us to talk about the admittedly short poem of by Tennyson. Um, if we don't have the energy, I don't think he'll be too mad at us, or disappointed, I should say. But if we do, would you want to quickly go over it and give it our impressions, or how are you guys feeling?
I'm not. I'm not.
Your poetry out.
That's not,
Okay.
yeah, that's not something I'm not. I'm not into. That's not something I'm
Okay.
particularly enthusiastic about.
Okay. Okay. And Roderick, I take it you're feeling similar.
I'm actually fine either way. I'm down to talk about Tennyson if you are.
I wouldn't mind. I can do it. I can do it. John, it was a pleasure. You don't have to stay around,
No,
obviously.
I was gonna screw. I was just gonna use this time just to ask how people were doing and stuff like that. I was actually curious. Where do you live?
Illinois, outside of Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Okay.
Calgary, Alberta.
What's that?
Uh, Calgary, Alberta. Alberta.
Oh,
Oh, you're
Uh,
in Alberta. Okay.
yeah.
Actually, I have a friend in Edmonton. I was supposed to go there um, um, this month, but I didn't go. So.
is that near me or Roderick? Right.
I was just to Roderick.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
Um,
Cool. Well, John, how are you? Yeah, we could stop for a moment and just check on everybody.
yeah. Well, good. I just started a new job, so I was a little bit pressed for time over the last 2 weeks, and then I'm going back to Mexico in a couple of weeks, and I'll spend the summer there. And then in August, I'm going to Austin. So
Oh, very cool.
yeah, it's a lot of moving.
Yeah, or you're moving to Mexico, or are you
Oh
visiting?
no, I'll just be in Mexico for the summer. I'll be working. I mean, I'll be working from there, but I wanted to be somewhere else than Texas over the summer.
What? Now you're working at a restaurant, right? And,
No, I was working at a restaurant until about April, and that was like so I worked there for like 4.5 months. I saved up some money to make my trip to Mexico,
fun.
and then when I was in Mexico, I got a regular job. So I'm working as a software engineer now, and what's nice about this one is it's fully remote. So
Nice.
yeah, it works out that um, I can be in Mexico while I do this job. So that's kind of like
A plus. Yeah, I was about to ask. You're going to Mexico right after a new job. Must be,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually not too bad. It's been about a couple weeks now, and I still have like free time to write. Just because it's it's remote and people aren't like monitoring me while I'm
Right, you don't have to pretend to be doing something.
yeah, exactly. Which is one of the I actually was I was working as a software engineer earlier, and like a couple years ago, and I quit my job so I could spend time writing, and I feel like now I can do both, or at least in this job, in this current company.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to ask. I remember I remember you
Oh,
mentioning that you left your job to pursue writing.
Yeah.
And I was curious
So what
that
do you do, Warren? I was gonna.
school, about to finish senior year. I'm a returning student, so I took a few years off, and I'm finishing up an English degree come next year, second semester. I mean, I could speed it up, but I'll probably be lazy. But yeah, other than that, nothing. And this, so
That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
What about
So,
you, Mark?
yeah.
Roderick, do you wanna tell us a little bit about the man
oh,
behind the poem?
Um, I just finished my second year university. I'm currently in undergrad, and yeah, it's spring and summer. I'm learning to drive, and other than that, I'm not doing too much. Just sitting at home and writing and reading. Honestly, sometimes I feel guilty for consuming more media than I produce, but I guess it's something I have
Nowadays,
to
you
go
can't
through.
help but do that. I mean, media is thrown down our throat, if you ask me. So, um,
Yeah, I think it is. I think one of the challenges that I have, that now that I'm older, but also just now that I'm like in our current uh, technological societies, I feel like I have so many more distractions that prevent me from reading, or not prevent me from reading, but like um, get in front of my reading than I did before. I remember when I was first out of college. This is a long time ago, more than 15 years ago. Um, I actually worked at a tutoring center, and I had like 2 days off a week, just Saturday and Sunday, and I would just go to the bookstore
hmm,
on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and like literally just stay at the bookstore all day long and read.
right.
And I like that sounds insane to me now. Reading for that long. And I think that there aren't like physically there aren't physical spaces where you can do that without distraction, because um, if you went to a library nowadays, you'd be surrounded by computers, um, and if you ever get bored reading, you can just go onto the internet, or pull out your phone. So I feel like there's so many other media getting in front of readers today, and also in front of writers. I don't,
Yeah,
what do you guys think about?
uh, I think I kind of think social media. I'm 27, so I'm thankfully not Gen part of Gen Z. Roderick, I don't know if you are. I just feel like Gen Z has to deal with a
Oh
lot.
dear.
Um, but so I'm pretty. I feel like social media in general, frankly, sort of evil. I don't know. I know that's extreme. I'm joking partially, but the way in which it commodifies my attention, or at least attempts to constantly, is very apparent and intrusive, manipulative. It's peculiar. And as you were saying, it's kind of part of me now. This is all I have too. I only have Discord. I don't use anything else anymore. Um, but
Do you
I
not use like Instagram or Facebook or anything?
no nothing, and that's been for a few years now. Not that I got much out of it in the first place, but I have to use LinkedIn. You have to use LinkedIn, so I have that. But you can't get a job. But
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
that's not a huge one. But in general, I do feel when it comes with technology that not only is it everywhere, but we're so used to it that unconsciously my body is very aware that I could obtain, pleasure within a shorter amount of time by looking at my phone than reading a book or even a page of poetry. And that's not a conscious thought, but it seems present in my body by the sheer amount of times that I'm able to put down my book or the poetry that's 3 pages long, God forbid, and just want to open Discord or something. Um,
Mm.
so that's where I'm like, okay, this is kind of evil. I mean, this is just it has too much power over my day to day. So I'd agree. I think we're kind of. I'm not going to be fear mongering, but I generally think that we're not really, and you hear this from older generations and stuff, and I have my gripes with it, but that we're not really programmed biologically to know how to use the internet wisely, at least not in its current form.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah,
It's it sort of hooks you on these very um, sort of intrinsic impulses. You're constantly. I mean, your brain constantly needs a source of stimulation or to resolve whatever sort of questions or thoughts come up, and it's very hard to fight that urge.
Yeah, there's a saying
It's so
that
deeply seated.
there's a saying from a band I listened to when I was younger. I still like the band. It was Tool, but I think one of their sayings was from a lyric was "Boredom is not a burden anyone should bear," and I think that's kind of a motto nowadays. So I'm never bored. If I'm bored, I'll find something to be anxious about. You know what I mean? So it's weird.
Roderick, sorry. Actually, Warren, I'm curious. What was the best classes that you took for writing? And the reason why I ask is that I'm signing up for my classes actually just this week for the writing program at UT, and we can pick classes outside of our major. So I was thinking of taking some classes in the journalism school that have to do with like reporting or journalism or or magazine writing. There's a few classes in those sorts of topics, and I was wondering what
I
if you took any classes that were like along those lines. And
No, I can't. I'm probably not going to be much help. I'm just taking straightforward academic writing classes. So, English history, early American novels, that kind of thing. Um, I can't really say. I think the best class, I can say this, the best class that I've really taken in terms of my own writing career of
Mhm.
like free writing, not learning how to write academic papers, which I'm a tutor at my school, so I know how to do that. And uh, it was a poetry seminar that was by far the most enriching. Even though my classmates, I'm
Interesting.
older than most people, I think your experience will be a lot better. This might be the most key thing in some sense, now that I'm thinking about it out loud, is that if you have an older group of students, I think it makes the experience a lot better. There's a lot more confidence. There's a vision. You want to say something. I'm 27. Many of the students that I'm around are anything from like 18 to maybe at latest 22, and that's still a
Mhm.
big gap. So
Yeah.
um, I think you'll probably find a lot of passion. This is for an MFA, or what is this? Is for grad
Yeah,
school of
this
some
is for the
sort.
yeah, this is for the MFA, but
Yeah.
um, we in the MFA we have like one. What's nice about this one is we have one workshop per semester, and that'll be my the fiction writing workshop that I'll be taking, and then um, we sort of have free reign to take any other classes that we want
Mhm.
in in the department. So the I was speaking with my advisor, and she said a lot of people they'll take either English classes or they'll take classes in the RTF department because it's a lot of like watching movies and then writing essays about the movies that they watched, which is it's just kind of nice. It's mostly just it seems like a pretty easy an easy class at that point if you're just watching a movie.
Right.
But I wanted to do something that I wanted to do something that was like that where I was sure I was going to make the best use of my time, and for me that was like doing as much writing as I could that was actually would actually be useful outside of academia. So, for example, the reason why I was interested in these journalism classes or these or magazine writing classes is because I'd like to write something in the class that I could get published somewhere, um, and develop like a portfolio that I could use as a freelancer or just as a writer in general. Um, so I was thinking of trying to decide what would fit that sort of.
I think you'll probably have a good experience. Again, I think, especially with journalism, I know plenty about how useless academic writing is outside of academia. So I think that's probably a good way to spend it. And what's interesting, at least from my stereotypes of journalism majors, there's a lot of passion and people who want to write about what's actually going on. I think with English majors, including myself, we're a bit stuck in the past or envisioning ourselves as some kind of great author, right? So I think the journalism class is probably a good bet for some real life. You know what I mean? As far as you can find that in academia.
Yeah.
Just to put my 2 cents in there, if you do ever have the spare time, I actually recommend taking some linguistics courses, just introductory level, because what I found that it sort of brings a lot of the things you subconsciously know for language and a lot of conventions and constructs that you take for granted into your conscious mind, so you're consciously aware of it. And once you're aware of it, you can bend the rules and play it around more in your writing and in your dialogue specifically. So that's something that I found helpful. Just sort of my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I actually was interested in I was interested in doing something with linguistics recently. I was thinking I'll have to look into what's available at UT and see if there's something that would be good. But that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, I guess just as an English major, they actually don't teach you anything about English in that sense. So I've learned the most about actual, in terms of linguistics and grammar in being a tutor. So yeah, that'd be cool. Does it, Roderick? Do you have anything that you want to bring up? I just can't see your face, so I can't read the room as well.
Oh,
We can't tell
sorry,
people.
my desktop doesn't have a webcam, so
That's
it's sort
fine.
of stuck being fixed. No, not anything in particular, actually.
Okay.
But are we still sort of on for next time, next Friday?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Do we want to do this weekly, or is
I'm
what's
content.
your thought?
I have nothing going on, so I'm fine with weekly. Not everyone has to show up every time. I think I thought it would only be me and Roderick today, so I'm really glad with the turnout. So because once you have 3 people, you can have a conversation. 2, it's a little bit like, yeah, I see what you mean, and vice versa.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel? Would you want, John? You seem like you kind of want bi-weekly.
No, I mean, it's I sort of leave that up to you and other people, just because for me, it would be unrealistic for me to write a poem every every week, given that I've written like 1 poem in the last 2 years. But yeah, I think weekly is good, because I mean then it's sort of like it's very regular, and people can bring in stuff when they've got it.
I think, at least in my intention. Sorry, Roderick. I don't mean to cut you off from having a moment to say your piece. Part of it is also just to create some sort of community, right? It's just nice, the weekly event, seeing each other, talking, so on and so forth. So. How do you feel about the weekly sessions, Roderick?
Oh, I'm fine with it because I've been working on my web for the past 3-4 years, so I have a backlog of content that's sort of just sitting, that's just rotting in a Google Drive folder.
Okay, great.
I could pull out for workshop and pretty much anything.
Awesome. Good to hear.
Yeah.
I take it we're kind of pooped in terms of Port Tennyson.
I'm still fine with Tennyson if you'd like.
I could do it. I want to make Uguay happy because he's new, and
yeah, and because he couldn't come.
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So
well, I will jump off.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was great seeing you guys, and I'll see you guys next week. Okay.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Rest
Yeah.
up.
Right. Cheers.
All right, Uguay, if you're listening. Cool. You want to just jump into it? Do you want to read it? I can read it.
Yeah, I'm fine with it both. Do you want to?
I
I
can
don't
read
know.
it. Yeah, I
Do
can
you,
read it.
yeah, thanks.
All right. So, In Memoriam, I think that's how you pronounce it, 5 by Alfred Tennyson. I sometimes hold it half a sin to put in words the grief I feel, for words like nature half reveal and half conceal the soul within. But for the unquiet heart and brain, a use in measured language lies, the sad mechanic exercise, like dull narcotics numbing pain. In words like weeds, I'll wrap me o'er, like corset clothes against the cold. But that large grief which these enfold is given in outline and no more. Cool. Yeah. Maybe we can do because it's someone else's poem and some professional. We can look at it a little more structured, like um,
Rhyme scheme is ABBA.
yes, is it sin, feel, reveal? Oh yes, yes it is. BABBA. Yeah, okay. And that goes throughout. Yes, it does.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. And 3 stanzas, um, all 4 lines. Well, what do you think it's about?
Well, it's sort of he's struggling with he's Tennyson is sort of contemplating the nature of language here, right? Is that by expressing our ideas when in some ways we fail to communicate them in whole, and we leave room for them to be misinterpreted or misconstrued by others. In a sense, so when you're trying to put your emotions into words, um, that's sort of what happens. At least that's what I got from it.
Yeah, I would generally agree, and that's what I was thinking, but I kind of jumped over the nuance of, putting something out there and then it being misinterpreted by someone else. I thought even that it would conceal, the soul, which is, conceals the soul, that you can never express it. So I stopped before even thinking about how other people would interpret it, but I think that's definitely what's going on here. And then also this idea that, okay, so it's a sin to put grief into words because it only half reveals the soul within. And then the question is like, if you don't express it, it seems to imply that that expression is perfect, right? If you don't express it, it's fully expressed,
Yeah.
or at least known, weirdly enough. I think we can all relate to, at the very least, the idea of poetry or language as kind of a narcotic, a numbing pain. That's certainly how I use it. I almost never write unless I'm feeling bad, which is too bad. Um,
Me
but
too.
right, yeah. And knowing Uguay, I'm not going to call him out, even though he's going to be listening to this probably. Is that he strikes me as that type too. Um, let's see if there's any lines you like specifically.
Oh, yeah. Just sorry to bring this back to interpretations again. But another way you could interpret it, I think, is how you know that as a human being you have that intrinsic response. So when you get hurt, you say "ouch," right?
Mm-hmm.
Where when you are sort of suffering, you feel the urge to complain, to whine, to sort of spread that misery to other people, or to signal to other people that you are in pain or
Mm-hmm.
you're suffering. And from that, that sort of maybe another way to interpret it would be that Tennyson is arguing against such a practice, is that you should sort of contain your emotions and not let it spill over, just so that you could get a temporary relief, even when other people might sort of suffer because of it. Because, when you vent to somebody, they sort of don't feel the greatest either.
Mm-hmm.
sort of that's just another interpretation. But in terms
Yeah,
of line, I particularly like. I think this second stanza as a whole is really nice, and then again the dual narcotics, the main pain, is one that I found particularly insightful.
yeah. I think there are, I think the go-to ones, just on my first impression, for words like nature, half reveal and half conceal the soul within. I think it's a nice tempo and also just a nice idea, very clearly stated. And the ambivalence in the first stanza on a whole is made very clear, very concise. But I like that you pointed out the second stanza because although those other lines were interesting and cool, I liked his description of the poet or the speaker, whatever, as the sad mechanic exercise. And I thought that was just an interesting characterization, right? It's not exactly the divine or spirited poet expressing their grief, right? It's the sad mechanic, dirty, on the ground, fixing something or altering something physical, right? Um, so I thought that was an interesting
It's
that drew my attention. Yeah, sir.
it's also sort of you could also read it as a potentially sort of a meta reference of the tortured artist archetype,
Mm.
such as Tennyson himself. No, did Tennyson lead a good life?
No idea. I imagine he was. I mean, he was a lord. I know that, so he's probably wealthy. But I think he probably didn't have a very happy life. That's my guess. I don't know anything about Tennyson really. Um, I'm not going to look into it right now. I'm sure Uguay could tell us, but
Yeah. And do you, speaking of broader historical and cultural context, which sort of uh, movement of poetry was Tennyson in? So he
uh,
was definitely before modern. Was he romantic?
let's see. Let's see. He's 1829, so past romantic. So this would be. Oh wait, I don't know when he was actually born. That's when he was awarded something. 1809 to 1892. So what? That's a little past the Victorian era and into the modern era, I think. Um, or that's the Victorian era. Probably the end of the Victorian era. So, because or see, I should know this. I'm an English major. Let's see, Victorian era. I'm pretty sure I'm right. Yeah, 1837 to 1901. So this is pretty Victorian. Um, and as far as I know from school, that's when it's kind of the blossoming of the inner life of the poet. We started actually, literature started being a thing, and a new interest in the spiritual and in the inner life and all sorts of that stuff.
Oh, so transcendentalism? Is that the word?
You could call it that. I think it's definitely more reflective than a lot of poetry before it, and not necessarily so because poets are all over the place throughout history, but definitely a trend towards more.
The more introspective in terms of
Yeah,
content.
yeah,
Yeah, then we sort of see this in the poem, in that the speaker is sort of reflecting upon his own use of language and his own act of being of writing poems and being a poet,
mm-hmm.
of how that he uses that sort of to numb his pain. Though like though Tennyson doesn't necessarily propose a solution to that inner pain that the speaker feels,
Mm-hmm.
but just instead describes a temporary way to sort of alleviate it. So
Yeah. I don't think he's. Yeah, he just says
on
it's
that,
given an outline.
Hmm?
It's he just says it gives you an outline, right? It's like weeds
Yeah.
that you wrap over. It kind of protects you from the cold. So in an interesting way, if the cold is already the inner pain and turmoil that you're facing, and you expressing it works as a corset against that cold. It's a very contained sort of function. But yeah, it is a bit, at least in its language, it's a bit down. It's a bit like, well, this is the best you got, and even then, I'm not sure we should be doing it. Right?
Yeah, blacked out Tennessee.
Yeah.
Though I do find it a little bit funny how sort of that weird juxtaposition because the pain is on the inside, and so yeah, and yet the poetry, the metaphor that he uses for poetry, is a cloth that you cover with yourself on the outside to protect you from the external elements, even though your pain is internal. So I guess it could also be that sort of that it might actually the last stanza might actually argue against the first two stanza using this kind of interpretation um, in that if you do not if you speak if you try to put the pain into words you're still essentially you're just sort of isolating yourself with it, yeah,
Yeah.
in that
Potentially, right? Yeah.
you're cutting yourself off from the external world to sort of revel, to wallow in your own pain.
That could be, yeah. I mean, depending on whether or not, right, you show it to anyone or it does you any good, right? It might, in fact, because when you said that, what comes to mind is, when we describe our pain, in some sense, we're diagnosing it, right? And we're not always the most keen on what's actually happening. So in that way, the pain we think we're feeling might actually be related to something else, and our expression of it actually makes things worse because it's not even, my leg's broken, but I'm talking about, the sprain on my finger. Um, and so you kind of get away from it. Now, in terms of like, I think what you're getting at is what there's kind of a toxicity in the obsession with our own pain.
Yeah, sort of
Okay.
like that. Um, and by specifically the use of words, so the word comes up a lot in this poem, and so I was wondering, by words, do you think that Tennyson means specifically words of poetry, so sort of waxing poetic, or some dramatically heightened language that's laden with imagery and illusion, or does words just more generally language as a whole, all forms of it?
I think I think just language. That's because he never specifies, and he equates it to like nature, right? So it's ubiquitous for words like nature, half reveal and half conceal the soul within. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was sort of the second stanza sort of adds an element to that in that it's sort of hinting more towards poetry because it's in specifically measured language. So I was
Mhm.
wondering if there would potentially a possible interpretation that sort of trying to communicate your pain in sort of this um, in this dramatic and aesthetically heightened language itself is doing more harm than good, whereas communicating it, putting it simply, and putting it simply and colloquially in a way that you know people can very easily understand if that one is actually preferable to sort of waxing poetic about your own internal agony.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good catch. Yeah, that in the second one through measured language lies the sad mechanic exercise. Um, that he's specifying about poets specifically. Um, I'm not sure if he would say one's worse than the other. Um, right, you just describing, oh, I feel shitty because of X, Y, and Z versus my heart lies at the bottom of a well with, so on and so forth. I don't know. I don't know what I think in terms of that. My initial impression is just that it could go either way, but it does seem like he's shitting on language in general.
Yeah.
I like his comparison to words like weeds, right? And I think it almost feels like he starts with the nature of language itself, right, in the first stanza. The second one, as it pertains to poets. Then the third stanza is how it pertains to me, the poet, how I specifically use it. Although you could argue that it's still just talking about language in general. But I like how he calls in words like weeds, "I'll wrap me over," and that's just a nice. And of course, it closes again, where he's making words into something actually organic and textured and embodied.
Yeah, and he's also adding a layer of direction with the derogatory connotations, right, of weeds and courses.
Yes. Yeah, something to get rid of, right? Oh, it grows up. You can't do anything about it, but then you take it out. It's harmful to the garden. Generally, yeah. So that's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with him personally. At least with your interpretation, I tend to forget about my poetry, so it doesn't bother me too much after I, like the sad mechanic, dole out the narcotic to myself. So, I like it. I don't mind just, giving myself an outline, getting some attention, having you read my poem with a group of other people and commenting on it. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think the same way. So do you have any plans after this, or would you be down to read Bone Dog as well?
We could, yeah, we could go for it. I do. Let's see, what time is it? Around 7:10. I have to go, but we could. You want to go for it? We could go for it, or we could save it. It's your call.
I'm just wondering, since most people seem to be more interested in the workshop aspect, in reviewing other people's submissions, as opposed to going over published poems. So I was wondering if you'd be down to just go through it.
I'd be down to go through it. The problem is, I have about 20 minutes. If you're
Oh.
if
Right.
feel,
Right. I completely forgot that you're in Central Time, so you only have 20
Oh, I
minutes.
see.
Oh, right.
Right. But
Yeah.
if you're fine with that, we could go for it. If not, I think something we could do is, I think most people are interested, including myself, a little more interested in workshopping my own poetry because it's a little more engaging and personal. But we have two choices in general. Is that we'd cover 3 of our own poetry or any number of our own poems, and then always cover someone else. Or maybe if people are down, like I think Uguay would be interested in just having a group that looked at other people's poetry. But I'm just thinking out loud. So that's maybe something we could do. But in general, back to what's going on right now. Do you think would you want to save it for later, next session, or whenever that might be, or do you want to
How
spend
much
20
time
minutes on
did
it
you
now?
say that you have?
I have now about 13 minutes, or no, 17 minutes. 17 minutes.
All right. Let's sort of save it next time then.
Okay, right. Yeah, it is a long one. Yeah, it deserves it, I think. Okay, well, awesome, Roderick. This has been awesome. I hope you can make it next week.
Probably could.
Okay, yeah, and we can cover this. We can cover your own poetry. We should really leave it open in general, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Are you planning to open it up to other forms as well? Any short forms, short story, flash fiction, any sort of little pieces.
I think we could. I think off the top of my head, what that demands of the of the audience is a little more. Poetry is pretty limited in length, and depending on how short, unless it's like flash fiction, then people will have to probably read it ahead. And when we're talking about media, we just might be too distracted, and that might actually make people not show up. So I don't know. I'm ambivalent about it, but I'll send it to other people. I'll see what people think, because if everyone's down to put in a little more extra work, I think that'd be fine.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, cool. Well, good talking again. I'd love to do it next week. Yep. Adios.